The phone on the polished mahogany dining table buzzed, a harsh, insistent sound that cut right through my sister Clara's self-congratulatory monologue about her new charity committee appointment. My fiancé Mark shot me a look of pure annoyance. It was the look he reserved for me when I committed some minor social sin, like breathing too loudly or existing in his general vicinity when he was trying to hold court. "Anna, really?" he hissed, his voice a low thrum of irritation. "Turn that off. We have guests." Our guests, his parents, and a few of his sycophantic business associates, all turned their heads to stare at me. I was the centerpiece of their pity party tonight, the poor, grieving granddaughter left with nothing but a trinket. "Sorry," I murmured, my voice perfectly pitched to sound apologetic and small. I reached for the phone, my hand deliberately slow. The caller ID read, "Mr. Petrov, Appraisals." This was it, a slow, cold smile, the first genuine one in months, touched my lips. I didn't try to hide it. I let them see it. For the first time since Grandpa's will was read, I smiled, and I saw the flicker of confusion in their eyes, a tiny crack in their wall of smug superiority. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It's easy to get lost in the memory of that perfect, beautiful moment of combustion. Let me start from the beginning so you can understand just how much pressure had been building inside that volcano. Right now, as I tell you this, I'm sitting in a leather armchair that smells of old books and new beginnings. Sunlight is streaming through a floor-to-ceiling window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. On a small velvet cushion on the table beside me sits the watch. It's not ticking. It doesn't need to. Its work is done. Looking at it now, it feels less like a timepiece and more like a trophy, a monument to patience. Before all this, my life was beige, a nice, unassuming, agreeable shade of beige. I was the family's designated helper, the reliable one, the one who never made a fuss. My older sister, Clara, was the star. She was beautiful, ambitious, and had a talent for making everyone feel slightly less interesting than her. My parents adored her, celebrated her every minor achievement as if she'd cured a disease. And me, I was Anna. Good old Anna, the one who remembered birthdays, who dog-sat, who helped Clara move apartments 4 times in 2 years, who listened patiently to my mother's endless complaints about the price of organic kale. My fiancé, Mark, fit perfectly into this dynamic. He was Clara's male equivalent, handsome, charismatic, and utterly convinced of his own brilliance. He was a rising star in finance, or so he said. He and Clara got along like a house on fire, often sharing inside jokes at my expense that I was expected to laugh at. They called it teasing. I called it exhausting. I thought this was just how things were. I thought my role was to be the quiet support beam that held up the more glamorous parts of the family structure. I loved Mark, or at least I thought I did. I was dazzled by his confidence, his big plans. I believed my purpose was to help him achieve them. I edited his reports, I organized his social calendar, I made sure his life ran like a well-oiled machine so he could focus on being important. The only person who ever seemed to see me was my grandpa, Arthur. He was my mother's father, a quiet man who smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper. He'd been an engineer, a man who built things, who understood mechanics and precision. While the rest of the family was loud, brash, and obsessed with appearances, Grandpa was thoughtful and observant. He never said much, but when he did, it counted. He'd watch Clara hold court at family dinners, a small, unreadable smile on his face. He'd observe Mark bragging about a stock market win with a quiet, steady gaze that seemed to see right through the bluster. He and I had our own little world. We'd sit in his study, filled with books on history and mechanics, and he'd show me his collection of old clocks and watches. He taught me how to clean the gears, how to listen for the specific rhythm of each timepiece. "Everything has its own heartbeat, Anna," he'd say, his voice a gentle rumble. "You just have to be patient enough to hear it." He was the only one who asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. He was the one who noticed when I was tired or sad, even when I was smiling and insisting everything was fine. He saw the person behind the beige wallpaper. When he passed away, it felt like the anchor of my world had been cut loose. The grief was a physical weight, a crushing presence in my chest. The rest of the family performed their grief loudly with dramatic sighs and public declarations of sorrow. Clara made sure everyone knew she was his favorite, a claim so laughably false it was almost insulting. Then came the reading of the will. It was the event that shattered the beige illusion and showed me the ugly, rotten framework underneath. We all gathered in a stuffy lawyer's office that smelled of lemon polish and disappointment. Clara was dressed in a chic, somber black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Mark sat beside me, his hand on my knee in a gesture that was supposed to look supportive but felt proprietary. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Thompson with a face like a tired bloodhound, began to read. The big assets went, as expected, to my mother. The house, a sizable portfolio of stocks. My parents were visibly pleased. Then came the bequests for the grandchildren. To Clara, Grandpa left his classic car, a vintage convertible she had always coveted and openly campaigned for. She let out a small, theatrical gasp and dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. To Mark, my fiancé, Grandpa left a sum of $25,000. It was a surprise and a significant gesture. Mark squeezed my knee, a smug smile playing on his lips. "What a guy," he whispered, as if he and Grandpa had been the best of friends. They hadn't. Grandpa tolerated him at best. And then it was my turn. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "And to my granddaughter, Anna, who always understood the value of patience and the beauty of a well-made thing, I leave my old wristwatch. May it serve you as well as it served me." Silence. A thick, heavy silence filled the room. I could feel every eye on me. I think my heart actually stopped for a second. His old watch? The simple steel-cased watch he wore every single day? It was worn, the leather strap frayed. It was nothing. Then came the sound. It started as a snort from Clara. She tried to stifle it behind her hand, but it broke free, turning into a full-blown giggle. Mark joined in, a low chuckle that shook his whole body. Soon my own mother was smiling, a tight, pitying expression on her face. "Oh, Anna, honey," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "That's sweet. He always did love that old thing." Clara leaned over, her voice a stage whisper loud enough for everyone to hear. "Well, at least you got something to remember him by. Maybe you can get $50 for it at a pawn shop." The laughter that followed was like a physical blow. It wasn't just amusement. It was cruel. It was triumphant. In their eyes, the will had just confirmed everything they already believed. Clara was the cherished one. Mark was the chosen son-in-law, and I was the afterthought, the beige girl who got a piece of junk. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a tide of humiliation so intense it made my vision swim. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to vanish. Mark pulled me close, whispering, "Don't worry, baby. I'll take care of you. You don't need his money." His words were meant to sound comforting, but they were laced with the poison of his own superiority. He was the provider now. I was the charity case. I just sat there, numb, clutching the small, velvet-lined box Mr. Thompson had handed me. Inside, the watch rested. It looked so plain, so ordinary. The steel was scratched, the crystal face clouded with age. It looked exactly like what they all thought it was, worthless. That night, the humiliation continued. Mark and Clara insisted we all go out to a fancy restaurant to celebrate Grandpa's life, which was really just an excuse for them to celebrate their good fortune. The entire dinner was a master class in passive aggression. "You have to admit it's a bit funny, Anna," Clara said, swirling a ridiculously expensive glass of red wine. "Grandpa, the great engineer, and his legacy is a broken-down car and a watch that probably doesn't even work." Mark chimed in. It's the thought that counts, I guess. He was getting old, probably wasn't thinking clearly. He patted my hand. Good thing you have me. Every word was a small, sharp jab. They were cementing the new world order. They were the winners, and I was the loser. I excused myself to the restroom, my composure finally cracking. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red, my face pale. I looked like a victim. I felt like one. But as I stood there, trembling with a mixture of grief and rage, Grandpa's words echoed in my head. Everything has its own heartbeat, Anna. You just have to be patient enough to hear it. I took a deep breath. I went back to the table, my expression carefully neutral. I endured the rest of the dinner, nodding and smiling in all the right places. I let them have their victory. Let them believe they had won. Let them think I was broken. When we got home, Mark was still high on his own generosity. He started talking about our wedding plans, how with his inheritance we could afford a much more lavish affair. We'll have to scrimp and save a bit on your side, obviously, he said, completely oblivious. But I can cover most of it. I just nodded. Later, when he was asleep, I went into my small home office and opened the watch box again. This time I looked closer. I ran my fingers over the worn leather, the cool steel. It felt solid, dependable, just like him. And that's when I saw it. Tucked into the worn velvet lining of the box, almost invisible, was a tiny, folded piece of paper. It was no bigger than my thumbnail. My fingers trembled as I carefully worked it free with a pair of tweezers. I unfolded it. On the paper, in my grandpa's tiny, precise handwriting, were just 3 things: a name, a Petrov, a phone number, and a single sentence. Patience is the key that winds the clock of destiny. A jolt went through me, a shock of adrenaline and something else. Hope. It wasn't just a watch. It was a message, a test. He had known. He had known what they were like. He had seen their greed, their arrogance. He hadn't left me a worthless trinket. He had left me a puzzle. And in that moment, the hurt and humiliation didn't vanish, but they crystallized into something else, something hard and sharp, resolve. They thought I was the beige, unassuming, agreeable Anna. Fine, that's exactly who I would be. I would play the part of the poor, pitiful loser. I would let them get comfortable in their superiority. I would let them underestimate me. It was, I realized, my greatest advantage. I folded the piece of paper and hid it away. I looked up the name Petrov online. The search results were immediate. Alexander Petrov, a world-renowned horologist and appraiser of antique timepieces, with a private, by-appointment-only office in the city. I didn't call the number, not yet. Grandpa's message was clear. Patience. This wasn't a race, it was a long game. My game. And I was going to play it perfectly. The next few months were an exercise in supreme self-control. I lived a double life. Outwardly, I was the picture of quiet defeat. I let Mark take the lead on all our wedding plans, nodding along to his extravagant ideas that he would graciously cover. I listened to Clara brag about the restoration of her new car and the trips she was planning. "You should come with me to Paris, little sis," she'd offer, her tone oozing fake sympathy. "It would be my treat, of course, to cheer you up." "That's so sweet of you, Clara, but I couldn't possibly," I'd reply, my voice soft and grateful. "I need to save up." Her smile was always a little too bright. My poverty was the perfect backdrop for her generosity. It made her feel good. It made them all feel good. Meanwhile, in my private hours, a different Anna emerged. The quiet, grieving girl was replaced by a meticulous researcher. I started with the watch itself. It was a Patek Philippe Calatrava, reference 96, an early model from the 1930s. Simple, elegant, and on the surface, moderately valuable to a collector, but not life-changingly so. Certainly not enough to explain Grandpa's cryptic note. But Grandpa was an engineer. He appreciated complexity hidden within simplicity. I began to study the schematics of that specific model. I bought books on vintage watches. I learned about movements, complications, and the tiny, secret signatures watchmakers used to use. I also started paying closer attention to Mark. I had always handled our joint finances, a task he found boring. He trusted me to pay the bills and balance the checkbook. He never bothered to look at the statements himself. He just saw the healthy number in our joint savings account and assumed it was all due to his genius on the stock market. Now, I looked with new eyes. I started a separate spreadsheet, a secret one. I tracked his expenses, the lunches that cost hundreds of dollars, the client gifts that looked suspiciously like new golf clubs for himself, the cash withdrawals that were never accounted for. And then I found the other account, a separate checking account I had no access to, but whose statements were accidentally mailed to our apartment one day. I opened it. My hands were shaking. The account was a whirlwind of activity, large deposits from sources I didn't recognize, and large payments to online betting sites and high-risk investment platforms. He wasn't a financial genius. He was a gambler, a reckless one. The $25,000 from Grandpa's will? It was gone in less than a month, vaporized in a series of bad bets. The money he was using to fund our lavish wedding wasn't from smart investments. It was from a high-interest loan taken out against a business he co-owned, a fact I discovered by doing a public records search. He was building a house of cards, and he was using my future as the foundation. I documented everything. I made copies of the statements, took screenshots of the transactions, and saved them all to a password-protected, encrypted thumb drive that I kept in a safe deposit box. The sense of betrayal was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but it didn't break me. It fueled me. Every lie I uncovered was another piece of steel for my armor. If you've ever felt completely and totally underestimated by the people who are supposed to love you, I know you'll understand the fire that was burning in me. It's a quiet fire, but it's hotter than any raging inferno. And if you're ready to see Mark and Clara get exactly what they deserve, maybe show a little support. Hit that like button for Grandpa, the master strategist who saw it all coming. My act became my art. I learned to cry on cue, just a little, when my mother would talk about how disappointed Grandpa must have been in me to leave me so little. I would let my shoulders slump whenever Mark talked about his financial successes. I made myself smaller and smaller in their eyes until I was practically invisible, just a sad little ghost haunting the edges of their glittering lives. The peak of their arrogance, the moment that truly sealed their fate in my mind, was the engagement party. Mark and Clara planned it together. It wasn't really for us, it was for them. It was a chance to show off the house my parents had given them a huge loan to buy, a monstrous new build in a soulless, gated community. Clara acted as the unofficial co-host, gliding through the rooms, pointing out the ridiculously expensive and tasteless furniture. Mark has such an eye for design, she cooed to a group of guests, gesturing at a chrome and faux fur monstrosity of a chair. He's a true Renaissance man, not just brilliant with money, but with aesthetics too. I had to physically bite my tongue to keep from laughing. The place looked like a Vegas hotel lobby had thrown up. They sat me at a table in the corner with the boring relatives nobody wanted to talk to. During the speeches, Mark's father stood up and raised a glass. To Mark and Anna, he began, but then spent the next 10 minutes talking only about Mark, his business acumen, his ambition, his bright future. He mentioned my name once more at the very end, almost as an afterthought. And to Anna, who is so very, very lucky to have him. The room applauded politely. I smiled my practiced, watery smile. Later, Clara cornered me by the dessert table. She was holding 2 plates of cake. "Here," she said, thrusting one at me. "You look like you could use it. It must be so hard watching all this, knowing you can't contribute." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice a perfect imitation of wounded innocence. Oh, come on, Anna, don't play dumb. This party, the wedding, the house, it's all Mark. You're just along for the ride. You should be grateful. After Grandpa's little slight, you didn't have many options, did you? Her eyes were gleaming with a special kind of sisterly cruelty. It was the final piece of evidence I needed. It wasn't just about money or status. She enjoyed my humiliation. She thrived on it. That night, I went home and finally made the call. A man with a thick Eastern European accent answered on the second ring. Petrov. Hello, I said, my heart hammering. My name is Anna. My grandfather, Arthur, left me a watch. And your name. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then the voice softened. Arthur's girl. He told me you would call. He said you were the patient one. When can you come? We arranged a meeting for the following week. The night before the appointment, I couldn't sleep. I was a bundle of nerves and anticipation. This was the moment the first key would turn. I had no idea what to expect. What if the watch was just a watch after all? What if Grandpa's note was just the ramblings of an old man? The doubt was a cold, creeping thing, but I pushed it away. I trusted him. He had never let me down. Mr. Petrov's office was not what I expected. It was a small, cluttered workshop on a quiet side street, tucked between a bakery and an old bookstore. The air inside smelled of machine oil and ozone. Every available surface was covered with the guts of clocks and watches, tiny gears and springs laid out on velvet cloths like surgical instruments. Alexander Petrov himself was a small, bald man with eyes magnified by a jeweler's loop that hung around his neck. He had the most incredible hands I had ever seen. Thick, powerful fingers that moved with the delicacy of a surgeon. He greeted me with a solemn nod and gestured for me to sit. Your grandfather was a fine man, he said, his accent still thick. A true artist. He understood the soul of a machine. Not many do. I carefully placed the box on his workbench. He opened it and stared at the watch for a long moment, not touching it. Ah, yes, he murmured. The messenger. He picked it up with a reverence that sent a shiver down my spine. He examined it from every angle, his loop now fixed to his eye. He didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity. I sat there, holding my breath. On the surface, he began, his voice low, it is a Patek Philippe Reference 96, steel case, a fine watch. In this condition, perhaps worth $30,000, maybe $40,000. My breath hitched. That was already far more than anyone suspected. It was more than Mark had received and promptly squandered. But I knew, from Mr. Petrov's tone, that this was not the main event. But your grandfather, he was not a man for surfaces. Petrov continued. He took a small, specialized tool from his desk and inserted it into a tiny, almost invisible seam on the side of the watch case. He gave a gentle twist. There was a soft click. The back of the watch didn't just pop off. It opened on a minuscule hinge, like a locket. My jaw dropped. This was not a standard feature of a Reference 96. This was a customization, a secret. Your grandfather and I, we worked on this together many years ago, Petrov explained, his eyes twinkling. A little project of ours. He called it his insurance policy. Inside, where the complex machinery of the watch's movement should have been, there was something else. The watch was a shell, a hollow, brilliantly crafted decoy, and nestled inside was a small, tightly wound scroll of microfilm and a single intricately designed key. My head was spinning. Microfilm? A key? It felt like something out of a spy movie. Mr. Petrov carefully removed the items with a pair of brass tweezers. He held up the microfilm. Your grandfather was a meticulous man. He suspected your fiancé was not honorable, and he worried about your sister's influence. He began to keep a record. Every financial discrepancy, every lie, every time they tried to manipulate him for money, it is all here. He then pointed to the key, and this This is the key to his real legacy. Not the house, not the stocks he made public. Those were a distraction, a test. This key opens a safe deposit box at a private bank in Switzerland. He let that sink in. I was speechless, staring at the tiny objects on his workbench that held the power to completely shatter the world my family had built. "What's in the box?" I finally managed to whisper. Mr. Petrov smiled, a genuine warm smile. The original patents for 3 of his engineering designs his old company stole from him and built their fortune on. He fought them for years, but they buried him in legal fees, so he kept the original signed and dated documents, proof, along with them, bearer bonds, a significant amount. He was a very careful, very quiet investor. No one knew the extent of it. He looked me straight in the eye. "Your grandfather did not leave you a watch, Anna. He left you a kingdom, and the evidence to burn his enemies to the ground." I walked out of that workshop feeling like a different person. The beige wallpaper had been stripped away, and underneath was something I didn't even know existed. I was no longer a victim waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was the one holding the hammer. The plan began to form in my mind, clear and sharp. It wasn't enough to just expose them. It had to be done in a way that would utterly dismantle their arrogance, their social standing, their entire sense of self. It had to be public. It had to be poetic. I had Mr. Petrov arrange for the microfilm to be developed and the documents to be legally certified. I hired a lawyer, not a tired family lawyer like Mr. Thompson, but a shark, a woman with a reputation for corporate litigation that was terrifying. She was thrilled with the case. She called it a litigator's dream. We had 2 prongs of attack. First, the lawsuit against the company that had stolen Grandpa's patents. With the original documents, my lawyer said it was a slam dunk. The settlement would be astronomical. Second, the evidence against Mark. The microfilm contained records of him pressuring Grandpa for loans he never repaid, and even a forged signature on a document attempting to give him power of attorney. Combined with the evidence I had gathered of his gambling and business fraud, it was enough to trigger a federal investigation. But before any of that, I had to set the stage. I needed one final performance. I called my mother. "I was thinking," I said, my voice full of false brightness, "we should have a family dinner to properly thank Mark for being so supportive of me through all this. My treat." My mother was delighted. It was the perfect narrative for her. Poor, grateful Anna finally doing something for her generous fiancé. I booked a private room at the most exclusive restaurant in the city, the kind of place Clara was always trying and failing to get a reservation at. I told them it was a surprise gift from a secret admirer to make them even more intrigued. Of course, they assumed it was one of Mark's wealthy clients. The night of the dinner arrived. I wore a simple black dress, the same one I had worn to my engagement party. I wanted the contrast to be perfect. They all arrived, dressed to the nines, loud and self-congratulatory. "Anna, darling, how on earth did you afford this?" Clara asked, looking around the opulent room with wide, greedy eyes. "Did you sell that old watch after all?" "Something like that," I said with a small, mysterious smile. The dinner was excruciating. They talked about themselves, their successes, their plans. Mark announced he was closing a huge deal that would make them set for life. Clara talked about being featured in a local society magazine. They were at the absolute peak of their hubris. They barely even looked at me. I was just the audience. It's amazing, isn't it? How people's true colors come out when they think they have all the power. I find it fascinating to just sit back and watch. I wonder what you all think. Drop me a comment below and tell me what you think the most satisfying part of a takedown is. For me, it's that moment of dawning realization. As the dessert plates were being cleared, I cleared my throat. "I actually have a little surprise," I said. "I finally got around to having Grandpa's watch appraised." Clara rolled her eyes. "Anna, please. Nobody cares about that piece of junk." "Humor me," I said, my voice steady. The appraiser is going to call me with the final valuation any minute now. He wanted to triple-check some historical records. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. The name on the screen read, Mr. Petrov, Appraisals. This was the moment I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times. The moment from the cold open of this whole story. Mark sighed dramatically. Anna, just put it on silent. It's embarrassing. No, I said, my voice suddenly cold and clear. It cut through the room and silenced them all. I think you'll all want to hear this. I answered the call and pressed the speakerphone button, placing the phone in the center of the table. Mr. Petrov, I said, you're on speaker with my family. They're very curious about my grandfather's watch. Ah, good evening, came his professional, accented voice. Yes, the valuation is complete. It is a complicated piece. Mark snorted. Complicatedly worthless, you mean? Not exactly, sir, Mr. Petrov said, his voice dry. The outer casing alone, a customized Patek Philippe reference 96, is valued at approximately $40,000. Clara choked on her water. Mark's smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. 40,000? My mother stammered. However, Mr. Petrov continued, his pacing perfect, that is largely irrelevant. The watch is a custom-built container. What was inside is where the true value lies. I watched their faces as he spoke. It was like watching the sun rise in reverse, their world plunging into darkness. First, there was a key, he said, a key to a Swiss bank account containing several $1 million in untraceable bearer bonds, as well as the original notarized patents for 3 foundational technologies of a major engineering firm. My legal associates estimate the value of the patent claim alone to be in the 9-figure range. A glass dropped from my mother's hand and shattered on the floor. No one moved. Clara's face had gone as white as the tablecloth. And second, Mr. Petrov's voice was now grim, there was microfilm, a detailed record kept by your grandfather of financial and emotional abuse. Specifically, it details multiple instances of fraud committed by one Mr. Mark Stanton, including the coercion of funds and the forgery of legal documents. Mark shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. His face was a mask of pure panic. This is insane. It's a lie. Anna, what is this? What did you do? I just looked at him, my expression calm. I did what Grandpa taught me to do. I was patient. I listened, and I waited. To that end, Mr. Petrov's voice concluded, a final nail in the coffin, a copy of this microfilm, along with a substantial file of supporting evidence, was delivered to the office of the district attorney an hour ago. I believe they will be very interested in your big deal, Mr. Stanton. I disconnected the call and placed my phone back in my purse. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Mark's ragged breathing. His entire world, his carefully constructed house of cards, had been annihilated in a 3-minute phone call. Clara was the first to break. She turned on Mark, her face contorted with rage. You idiot, you ruined everything. Me, he shrieked, his voice cracking. She's the one who did this. Your crazy sister. My parents were just staring at me, their mouths agape, as if seeing me for the first time. The beige wallpaper was gone. They were looking at a stranger. I stood up, smoothing down my simple black dress. Well, I said, my voice light, this has been lovely, but I have a plane to catch. Switzerland calls. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the wreckage of their lives scattered behind me on the expensive carpet. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sounds of their screaming and accusations were the sweetest music I had ever heard. The aftermath was swift and brutal, exactly as my lawyer had predicted. The news of Mark's arrest for fraud hit the financial papers the next week. The big deal he was closing was a Ponzi scheme, and his partners, the ones who had toasted his genius at my engagement party, turned on him instantly to save themselves. He was ruined, utterly and completely. The company that had stolen Grandpa's patents, faced with incontrovertible proof and the threat of a massive public lawsuit, settled out of court. The number was, as my lawyer had promised, astronomical. It was more money than I could ever have imagined. But it was never really about the money. It was about the justice. It was about Grandpa's name being cleared. Clara's downfall was less legal and more social, but no less devastating for her. Her association with Mark made her toxic. The Society magazine that was supposed to feature her ran a story about the scandal instead. Her fair-weather friends abandoned her. The vintage car Grandpa had left her was repossessed. As it turned out, Mark had used it as collateral for one of his shady loans. She was left with nothing but her expensive, tasteless furniture in a house she could no longer afford. My parents tried to reach out, of course. A series of desperate voicemails. They were sorry. They never knew. They were just so worried about me. It was all a misunderstanding. Their apologies were as hollow as the watch case had been. They weren't sorry for how they treated me. They were sorry I had the power now. I never called them back. The most satisfying moment of all, however, came about a month later. I had just returned from Zurich, having secured my inheritance and set up a foundation in Grandpa's name to fund young, aspiring engineers. I was unpacking in the new apartment I'd bought, a beautiful, light-filled space overlooking the park, when my doorman buzzed. "There's a Mr. Mark Stanton here to see you, miss. He says it's urgent." I almost laughed. I told the doorman to send him up. I wanted to see this. The man who stood at my door was a ghost of the arrogant fiancé I had known. He was gaunt, his expensive suit rumpled. His eyes were wild with desperation. "Anna," he breathed, trying to force a smile. "You look amazing." "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, my voice flat. He launched into a pathetic, pre-rehearsed speech. He was sorry. He had been a fool. He was under so much pressure. Clara had been a bad influence. He still loved me. He had always loved me. We could start over. With my money, they could make all his legal troubles disappear. He could pay everyone back. We could still have that life he had promised. He actually tried to take my hand. I looked down at his hand, then back up at his desperate face, and I thought about all the nights I had cried myself to sleep over his casual cruelty, all the times he and my sister had laughed at my expense, all the moments I had felt small and worthless. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. I let the silence stretch, letting him stew in his own pathetic pleading. Then I gave him a small, cold smile. The same smile I had given him at the dinner table right before his world ended, and I closed the door in his face. The solid, satisfying click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the final word in our story. So that brings us back to now, to this chair, this sunlight, this peace. It's funny, the watch doesn't seem old or plain to me anymore. It shines. It has a weight to it, a substance that goes beyond steel and glass. It's a reminder. Life is different now. I'm different. I'm no longer beige. I'm the one who decides the color palette of my own life. I run Grandpa's foundation, and I've never felt more fulfilled. I get to invest in brilliant young minds, people like him, who see the world not just for what it is, but for what it could be. And I'm not alone. About 6 months ago, at a fundraiser for the foundation, I met someone. His name is Leo. He's an architect, and he has the kindest eyes I've ever seen. He's quiet, like Grandpa was. He listens more than he talks. The first time he came over to my apartment, he noticed the watch on its velvet cushion. "That's beautiful," he said, his voice full of genuine admiration. "It looks like it has a story." And I smiled, a real smile, wide and easy. "It does," I said, "and I'd love to tell you." Grandpa was right. Patience is the key that winds the clock of destiny. He left me more than a fortune. He left me a lesson. He taught me that true value is rarely on the surface. He taught me that the quietest people often have the most to say, And most importantly, he taught me to know my own worth, even when no one else does. Never let anyone else determine your value. That's the real inheritance he left me, and it's worth more than all the money in Switzerland. The story is over, but the lessons live on. You can bet there are more stories just like this one, waiting to be told. All you have to do is be patient and listen for the ticking of the clock.